The day they tried to erase me was the day the ground beneath them began to crack. They wanted me gone. What they never realized was that cutting me out meant pulling the one thread holding their empire together. My name is Daniel Cross. For 10 years, I poured my soul into Hale & Partners, one of the fastest rising investment firms in the city. I wasn't the face on magazine covers or the man shaking hands with billionaires. That was reserved for Richard Hale, the firm's founder and my supposed mentor. To him, I was the quiet genius, the man in the background crunching numbers, sealing contracts, and making sure every risky deal turned into gold. To the outside world, Richard was a visionary. To me, he was the man who plucked me out of grad school and promised me a future brighter than anything I could imagine. "Stick with me, Daniel," he'd said, "and you'll never have to worry again." For years, I believed him. I gave everything to the company: late nights, missed birthdays, the collapse of a relationship or two. Every success we had, I carried on my shoulders. Richard would walk out to applause while I stayed behind, making sure the applause was deserved. And I didn't mind. Or at least, I told myself I didn't. But somewhere along the way, I started noticing the shift. My ideas were pitched as Richard's. My deals were announced as his victories. Invitations to high-level meetings that once had my name on them suddenly didn't. I was being pushed into the shadows, not gently, but deliberately. It wasn't just Richard. The partners who had once come to me for answers began treating me like I was expendable, a cog they could replace. I caught whispers in hallways, saw doors close just as I walked past. The atmosphere thickened, like smoke filling a room I couldn't escape. And then came the moment that confirmed what I already suspected. Richard invited me into his office, that smug smile plastered across his face. "You've done good work here, Daniel," he said, "but the board thinks it's time for fresh leadership. Maybe you should take some time off. Clear your head." Time off. Clear my head. I knew what it really meant. They wanted me out. They wanted me erased. But Richard and the others didn't understand one thing: you don't spend a decade building an empire brick by brick without knowing where every crack lies. So as I walked out of that office, my hands trembling but my mind sharper than ever, I realized something dangerous. If they wanted me gone, then maybe it was time to let them have exactly what they asked for. Because without me, their empire wasn't just vulnerable. It was doomed. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. The distance, the closed doors, the conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Maybe Richard was just under pressure. Maybe the partners were too busy to notice me. That's what I wanted to believe. But then the signs became impossible to ignore. Meetings I'd always been a part of suddenly moved without me. My calendar invites disappeared, replaced by vague excuses: "Didn't think you needed to be there." When I checked the minutes, I saw my strategies, my projections, presented word for word. Only Richard's name was attached. At client dinners, I was no longer seated near the decision-makers. Instead, I found myself placed 2 tables away, watching Richard soak in praise for work he hadn't even touched. He raised his glass with a grin, calling me his loyal right hand, while his eyes flickered with something colder, something calculating. It wasn't just Richard. The others followed his lead. Little slights added up: emails sent without me copied, deals signed without my review, a junior associate dismissing my input as too cautious. I'd walk into the office and feel it instantly: the shift in tone, the awkward silences. I wasn't being treated like a partner anymore. I was being treated like a liability. One night, I stayed late to finish reviewing a contract, only to find the final draft already printed and signed, my name replaced by Richard's. My stomach knotted. He hadn't just sidelined me. He was erasing me. The toll was heavier than I expected. Sleep slipped away first, replaced by endless nights replaying conversations, analyzing expressions, hunting for clues in half-finished sentences. Then came the headaches, the dull ache in my chest that refused to leave. My reflection in the office windows looked like a stranger, tired, drawn, and suspicious of everyone. Still, I wanted to believe I was wrong. Richard had been my mentor, almost like family. He wouldn't betray me, would he? The answer came in fragments. A phone call I overheard late one evening, Richard's voice low, sharp, saying, "Don't worry about Daniel. He won't be around much longer." A smirk I caught between two partners when I entered a room. And finally, a memo on my desk, unsigned, with a single line that chilled me, "Transition plan, phase out Daniel Cross." I sat there staring at the words, my pulse hammering in my ears. Transition plan. Phase out. They weren't just sidelining me, they were plotting to erase me completely. And as the office lights flickered overhead, leaving me alone with that memo in the silence, one thought lodged itself deep in my mind. If they want me gone this badly, what exactly are they hiding from me? The memo should have been enough, but I needed proof. Proof that Richard and the others weren't just moving on without me, they were burying me alive. That proof came faster than I expected. One Thursday morning, I arrived at the office to find my keycard denied at the entrance. Confused, I tried again. Nothing. Security asked me to step aside. Their tone was polite, but their eyes told a different story. They'd been waiting for this. When I finally made it upstairs, my office door was locked. Through the glass, I saw boxes, my boxes, already packed and stacked neatly like I'd vanished overnight. My nameplate was gone. In its place, a fresh one gleamed, Ethan Price, Vice President of Operations. Ethan. A junior associate I'd mentored. The kid I'd taught to balance his first client portfolio. The betrayal stung sharper than any memo. I stormed into Richard's office, my voice breaking before I even realized it. What the hell is going on? Why is someone else in my office? Richard didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, that smug smile cutting deeper than a knife. "Daniel, you've been invaluable here. But the board has decided it's time for new energy. Ethan's a better fit for where we're headed." I couldn't breathe. New energy? Richard, I built this place. Every deal, every number, every win, you paraded them as yours, but they were mine. And now you're cutting me out? His smile widened. Business is about evolution. Don't take it personally. But it was personal. I realized it when he slid a document across the desk, an official termination, already signed by the board. And stapled to it, like an afterthought, were financial statements I'd never seen before. Millions shifted, funneled, disguised. Transactions tied to my accounts, my approvals, my supposed oversight. My stomach dropped. "What did you do?" Richard's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Relax, Daniel. If anything goes wrong, you're the one the paper trail points to. Not me. Not the board. You." The room tilted around me. Anger, disbelief, heartbreak, they all crashed together until I could barely think. 10 years of loyalty, late nights, sacrifices, and now I was nothing but a scapegoat. My career, my reputation, my life, all hanging by a thread. Richard had cut himself. I stumbled out of his office, past the stares of people who already knew, past Ethan avoiding my eyes. My chest burned with rage, but underneath it, a colder truth began to form. Richard Hale hadn't just wanted me gone. He'd made sure that when I fell, I'd take the entire collapse on my shoulders. And as I stood in the empty lobby, staring at my reflection in the glass doors, one thought burned hotter than all the rest. If Richard wants me buried, then he doesn't yet realize he's already standing on the fault line. For days, I drifted like a ghost. The termination spread through the industry like wildfire. Calls I'd once answered with pride went silent. Emails were left unread. My name, the name I'd spent years building, was suddenly radioactive. Alone in my apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of a refrigerator and the mocking glow of unopened congratulatory plaques, despair sank its teeth into me. How could I fight men who'd orchestrated this so perfectly? Richard had stripped me of my position, poisoned my reputation, and left me with nothing but the faint echo of everything I'd lost. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it came jagged, dreams of Richard shaking my hand one moment and slipping a knife between my ribs the next. But then came the night everything shifted. I was cleaning through the pile of documents they'd hastily boxed for me when I found it, a thin folder wedged between marketing reports. It wasn't mine. The cover bore a date weeks before my termination. Inside were drafts of press releases, statements announcing Ethan's promotion, celebrating a new chapter of growth. They had planned my erasure long before I'd stumbled onto Richard's memo. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. In the margins, I recognized Richard's handwriting, meticulous, smug little notes about spinning my retirement as mutual, about praising my decade of contributions while quietly moving millions through accounts tagged with my signature. That was the trigger. Not just the betrayal itself, but the arrogance of it. They hadn't just replaced me. They'd scripted my disappearance, confident I'd slink away in shame while they bled the company dry. I sat there for hours, the anger burning away the last of my despair. By sunrise, something inside me had hardened. This wasn't just about revenge. It was survival. If Richard's scheme collapsed, the world would blame me. My career was already gone, but my name, my integrity, wasn't something I could let them steal. I thought about the years I'd spent building the very systems Richard had exploited. I knew where the money flowed, where the loopholes hid, where the skeletons in the company's closet were buried. For the first time since the lockout, I felt steady. Focused. I wasn't going to beg for a seat back at their table. I wasn't going to crawl away into obscurity. Richard Hale thought he'd ended me. But as I closed that folder and slid it under my arm, a whisper escaped my lips, a vow so quiet it could have been mistaken for breath. If you wanted me gone, Richard, then you should have made sure I'd never rise again. Because now, I'm coming for you. Revenge, I learned, wasn't a thunderclap, it was the slow tightening of a knot until something finally snapped. After the awakening, I turned the months I'd been given into a blueprint. If Richard had schemed and scripted my disappearance, I would answer in the only language he respected, consequence, measured and inevitable. Step 1, Evidence. I started where the light was weakest, the buried ledgers, the overnight transfers, the back-channel emails. Day and night blurred as I rebuilt the trail Richard thought he'd erased. I pulled audit reports, cross-checked timestamps, and matched handwriting in margin notes to the drafts I'd found in that folder. Where there were gaps, I used subpoenas through a quiet lawyer I trusted, not flashy legal firms that would leak, but a small practice that knew how to move without noise. Every forged initial, every routed payment, every friendly gift disguised as consultancy fees was catalogued. The files grew into a map, a route that led straight to Richard. Step 2, Allies. I couldn't do this alone. I found people Richard had hurt and treated them like the rare resource they were, motivated, sharp, and morally furious. Maya, a forensic accountant with a surgical mind, agreed to run the numbers in exchange for a signed promise I'd help clear her name from an old smear. Ben, a disillusioned ex-partner, handed over internal memos and meeting transcripts that proved the board's complicity. Then there was Carla Reyes, an investigative reporter who'd been chasing corporate rot for years. She smelled a big story and agreed to hold until the legal scaffolding was set. Step 3, Traps and Timing. Richard thrived in spectacle, award galas, investor reveal dinners, press briefings. So I built a stage where his performance would collapse under its own weight. I seeded a rumor about a blockbuster acquisition to inflame his impulses. I fed the bait through channels he trusted, a mutual contact, a whispered tip from a junior associate already bought into Ethan's, the new VP's, meteoric rise. Predictability was his weakness. He couldn't help but move first. Step 4. Legal architecture. Maya crystallized the financial forensics into impervious reports. My lawyer filed preservation orders and quietly secured subpoenas that would lock accounts the moment the journalist published. Carla rehearsed her release strategy, a coordinated timeline where press, law, and banking freezes would hit together, public exposure with legal teeth. The aim wasn't merely humiliation, it was to make any attempt at cover-up impossible. Throughout it all, Richard lived as if nothing had changed. He congratulated Ethan in the lobby, toasted his visionary leadership at cocktail parties, and posted victory photos that screamed arrogance. He booked his calendar with charity galas and investor lunches, utterly blind to the web tightening beneath his feet. 2 days before the reveal, we met in a dim conference room. The files lay between us, each page a small, clinical accusation. Carla's tablet was preloaded with the story. Maya's report was signed. The subpoenas were ready to be served. Ben held a list of offshore accounts, names and numbers waiting for the bank to act. I looked at each of them, allies, witnesses, co-conspirators in justice, and felt a terrible calm. Outside, through the glass, Richard's office lights still glowed. He was likely rehearsing his next speech. I slid a plain envelope across the table, the final piece of the plan, a single, unassuming packet addressed to the regulator and the press. My hand hovered over the envelope for a beat. Then my phone buzzed, a calendar alert, Richard Hale, gala speech, 8 p.m. I folded the flap without sealing it, tucked the packet under my jacket, and stood. The city hummed below like an unconscious crowd. My pulse was steady. As I stepped into the elevator, my thumb found the edge of the envelope. Outside, limousines began to pull up to the gala entrance. The doors were opening for Richard. I pressed the elevator button, and the doors whispered closed, my finger poised on a decision that would either finish him, or finally drag me into the ruin they had already planned for me. The gala glittered like a promise, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, faces lit by the soft glow of success. Richard stepped onto the stage with the practiced grace of a man who believed the world belonged to him. Cameras angled, investors leaned forward, and Ethan, smiling in the front row, clinked his glass as if the night were theirs to own. What they didn't know was that every light in that ballroom would soon reveal more than applause. It would reveal rot. Carla's story hit the wire with surgical timing. At 8:01 p.m., the big screen behind Richard flickered, not with his logo, but with a headline, Hale and Partners, the House of Cards. The video cut to cold, undeniable evidence, bank ledgers, time-stamped transfers, and the margin notes linking illicit disbursements to accounts carried in Richard's name. The crowd murmured. Richard's smile faltered. He reached for the microphone. Then the subpoenas arrived, quiet shoes on polished floors, 2 officers who did not shout but who did what mattered, they served court orders and sealed bank accounts. The lighting in the room shifted from warm to clinical. Phones rose. The quartet stuttered into silence. Maya's forensic report flashed across the screen next, line by line. She traced how millions had been routed through shell companies into Richard's private accounts and then recycled as consulting fees, complete with forged approvals that bore Daniel's handwriting. The irony landed like a physical blow. They had wanted Daniel gone. Instead, his absence had been the trigger that let the truth breathe. Richard's attempted denials looked small and desperate. He spoke of misunderstandings, of competitive pressure, of paperwork mistakes. But audiences don't forgive a paper trail that reads like a confession. Investors whispered, phones dialed lawyers. Ethan, who had filled Richard's seat so gleefully, turned pale as donors and partners rose to walk out. Cameras tracked every exit. Social feeds exploded with a clip of Richard's face as the first officer gently, inexorably, cuffed his wrist. Outside, bank terminals flashed, assets frozen. Wire transfers reversed. Offshore accounts were flagged. The legal architecture Daniel and his allies had built snapped shut like iron jaws. Richard's empire, roofed in charm and smoke, was collapsing inward, brick by brick, ledgers spilling like evidence of a crime scene. From across the room, I watched the man who'd wanted me erased being led past stunned guests, his tailored suit suddenly too thin against the exposure. He tried to meet my eyes once. There was rage, disbelief, the brief, naked animal panic of a man who'd believed himself untouchable. Then he was gone. I didn't cheer. I didn't need to. The cameras caught my face, steady, unbowed. Around me, allies exchanged looks that were part relief, part something sharper, the satisfaction of justice executed cleanly. They had wanted me gone. Instead, their decision became the fault line that swallowed them. In the cold after, I stood under the chandelier's fractured light and felt the last weight lift. The room had witnessed the collapse. So had the world. And in that quiet, I realized that the man who had tried to erase me had been the architect of his own ruin. In the weeks that followed the gala, the empire Richard Hale had so carefully constructed collapsed like a sandcastle at high tide. His arrest dominated every headline. Shareholders distanced themselves overnight. The board scrambled, issuing statements about integrity and moving forward, but no one bought the performance. The regulators moved quickly, buoyed by airtight evidence. Every shell company, every falsified approval, every dollar siphoned away was traced and catalogued. Richard's name became synonymous with greed and betrayal, an industry cautionary tale. Ethan, the so-called successor, resigned under public pressure, his career over before it had truly begun. And me? For the first time in months, I could breathe. The accusations once aimed at me dissolved under the truth. The media that had whispered my retirement turned its lens on Richard's fraud instead, painting me not as the scapegoat, but as the man who had refused to go quietly. Partners who had once cut ties reached out cautiously, some apologetic, some opportunistic. I accepted neither shame nor hollow reconciliation. I didn't need their validation anymore. Maya found her reputation restored. She returned to work with her head held high. Ben, long haunted by his silent complicity, stood taller knowing he'd helped dismantle the monster he once enabled. Carla's story won awards, not just for its impact but for the precision with which it exposed corruption. My allies had found their redemption too. As for Richard, the courtroom became his final stage. He tried to summon the old charisma, but the evidence was merciless. Each forged approval, each wire transfer, each smug margin note became a nail in his coffin. When the sentence was handed down, decades behind bars, his fortune seized, his legacy shredded, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not the towering figure who once controlled rooms with a glance, but a hollow man, undone by his own arrogance. I didn't celebrate. Justice didn't need fireworks. It needed only truth, and truth had spoken with finality. Walking out of that courtroom, sunlight warming my face, I felt a quiet strength settle into me. I wasn't just free. I was unshackled. They had wanted me gone, but in destroying me, they had destroyed themselves. And here's the poetic justice. The moment they erased my name was the very moment they signed their own obituary. And now, to you watching this, have you ever trusted someone only to discover they were sharpening the knife behind your back? How did it change you? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you want more tales of betrayal, revenge, and justice served cold, make sure you subscribe, because this is only the beginning.